It had been raining the day Linda left. Edward remembered that clearly, not because of the weather, but because the soft patter on the window was the only sound that didn't hurt. Her bags were packed, her eyes cold, her words sharper than he'd ever known her to be. "It's not about money, Edward," she said, almost trying to convince herself more than him. I need someone who listens, who sees me." He'd heard that line in movies, never thought it'd be used on him. He was a builder, a real estate guy, not some emotionally articulate poet. He showed his love through the life he gave her, the 3-story lake house, the beach vacations, the Mercedes she never thanked him for. But apparently, love now came in scrubs. Dr. Thompson. Tall, charming, wore a stethoscope like a fashion statement. The kind of man who looked like he had all the right words for the moment. Edward had met him once, at a fundraiser ironically hosted by Edward himself. Linda introduced them, her hand resting too easily on Thompson's arm. Edward noticed. He noticed everything now. The following weeks were a blur of silence and fury. The house, once loud with laughter and late-night music, echoed like an empty museum. Edward drank more, slept less, ignored calls, signed deals without reading them. His assistant, Marla, tried to intervene once, gently placing a bottle of water on his desk instead of scotch. He didn't thank her. He didn't even look up. Then came the news. The city had approved the permit for a new hospital downtown, a shiny $400 million state-of-the-art facility. Guess who was heading the medical board? Dr. Thompson. Edward laughed when he read the article, not out of humor, out of disbelief. The man had not only stolen his woman, he was now going to be the face of the biggest damn healthcare facility in the city. Something twisted inside Edward. Jealousy? Maybe. But more than that, it was pride. The same pride that had gotten him out of the gutter as a kid. The same pride that turned a broke 21-year-old construction worker into a millionaire with contracts in 4 cities. He'd built empires out of dirt. Who was this man to walk into his life like he owned something? That night, Edward called a meeting with his legal team. He didn't want to just invest in the hospital. He wanted to buy the land, fund the infrastructure, write the check nobody else could write. "You're serious?" Marla asked after the meeting, the disbelief on her face barely contained. "I don't fund causes," Edward muttered, lighting a cigarette. "I fund messages." It took months of silent maneuvering. He used shell companies, hired third parties, twisted zoning laws in his favor. He knew Thompson would never accept the money if he knew it came from him. That's why the signature on the checks wasn't Edward's. It was a foundation name he'd made up one night drunk on whiskey and revenge. When the deal was finally locked, he made one final move. The Edward J. Callahan Healing Center, the board announced at the press conference as reporters snapped photos and donors clapped like seals. Linda was there. So was Thompson. The look on their faces when the giant white curtain dropped to reveal the name engraved in steel over the entrance. It was a picture Edward would carry in his mind forever. After the ceremony, he walked past her slowly, hands in his pockets, sunglasses hiding a smug smirk. She stopped him. "Edward, you did this?" He paused. "You left me for a doctor," he said quietly, without venom. "I built him a temple to work in." Then he walked away, leaving her speechless in a crowd full of people cheering for a hospital he didn't care about. The weeks following the unveiling were strange. Edward found himself more at peace than he expected. Not happy. He wouldn't call it that. But there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that while Linda and Thompson thought they'd moved on, they were now working inside a monument that screamed his name every single day. It was subtle vengeance. Elegant. Permanent. But revenge has a funny way of not letting you rest. Edward felt it one night, sitting alone on his balcony, watching the city lights blink like broken promises. The wind carried distant traffic sounds, and a loneliness he hadn't prepared for. He'd won, hadn't he? So why did it still feel like he'd lost something deeper than her? He hadn't seen Linda since that day at the ceremony. She hadn't called, Not that he expected her to, but he checked his phone more than he admitted, hoping to see her name light up. Just once. Instead, it was silence. And maybe that hurt, more than a fight would have. Marla, ever observant, noticed his quiet shifts. She didn't say anything at first, just started bringing him black coffee instead of scotch, scheduled fewer meetings, left him alone more. One morning she walked into his office holding a brochure. "It's about the children's wing," she said carefully. "The board's looking for donors to expand the pediatric trauma center. They're naming floors this time. It's a legacy thing." Edward scoffed. "Trying to bleed me dry now?" She hesitated. "No, but maybe you want to be involved. For something that's actually useful." That word stuck with him. Useful, not flashy, not bitter, not revenge. That night, he drove to the hospital unannounced. Security knew him by now. They let him through without asking questions. He wandered through the halls, past the sleek white walls and silent elevators, past nurses who barely glanced up. And then he found himself outside the pediatric ward. The glass windows showed rooms decorated with cartoon murals and hanging mobiles, small beds, tiny IV poles, life holding on in its most fragile form. He stood there a long time, until someone tapped his shoulder. "Didn't expect to see you here," came a voice. Soft, familiar. He turned. Linda stood beside him, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, a white coat hanging off her slim frame. Her eyes were tired, but not cold anymore. "Could say the same about you," Edward replied, trying to sound casual. She looked at the kids, behind the glass. "I volunteer here, sometimes after shifts." There was a pause. "You planning to name this wing too?" she asked, almost teasing. He shrugged. "Maybe. Depends on what you'd call it." She turned to face him. "Why did you really do all this?" Edward looked at her, really looked. The woman he'd loved, who had once laughed at his bad jokes and dreamed about Paris and puppies. He searched her face for the version of her he missed, but found someone different now, older, wiser, maybe sadder too. "You want the truth?" he asked. She nodded. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of you building something beautiful with someone else," he said plainly. "So I built it bigger. And I made damn sure my name would come first." Linda's expression didn't change. She just sighed. "You always thought love was something to prove." "And you always thought love was something to feel," he countered. "Neither of us were right." Another silence passed. This one softer. "I'm sorry, Edward," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He blinked. "For what?" "For not fighting harder before I walked away." He didn't say anything to that. Didn't trust himself to. Then she did something unexpected. She reached for his hand, just for a second. No lingering promise, no dramatic moment. Just skin on skin, two people standing in the space where something once lived. Then she walked away, leaving him with 1,000 things he wanted to say and no clue where to begin. Days passed. Edward couldn't shake the feeling of her fingers, brushing his. Just that 1 second had left a burn deep in his chest because it felt familiar. Like the old Linda, the one who used to curl her legs under her on his couch and tell him about her childhood. The one who used to trace the lines on his palm like they were roads to something important. But now, that touch felt like a memory, saying goodbye. He didn't tell anyone about their encounter, not even Marla, who probably suspected something from the look on his face the next morning. Instead, he buried himself back in paperwork, property acquisitions, tax loopholes. But nothing clicked like it used to. The wins felt hollow. The money kept coming, but for once, he wasn't sure what he was building toward. Then one morning, he saw a press release online. Dr. Thompson to lead international outreach program in Uganda. Departure next month. Edward stared at the screen, lips pressed together, so the golden doctor was leaving. It felt odd, not victorious, not even bittersweet, just strange. Thompson, had been the symbol of Linda's new life. What did it mean now that he was gone? Or about to be? He didn't reach out to her. He figured if she wanted to talk, she would. But that night, he found himself driving again. Same hospital, same glass windows, same ghost-like feeling. He didn't expect to see her in the break room. Linda sat cross-legged on a couch, coffee cup in hand, eyes closed. She didn't look, surprised when he walked in. Maybe she'd been expecting him too. "You saw the news," she said softly, eyes still shut. "Yeah," Edward replied. "Didn't know you two were still close." "We aren't," she said, opening her eyes. "Not like that. It ended a while ago." He blinked. "You serious?" She nodded. "I just didn't want to explain, didn't see the point." Edward sat across from her, not too close. "So, why'd it end?" She laughed, not unkindly. "Turns out charm and empathy don't pay attention to bills or call you back when they're 2 continents away. He was a good guy, just not the right guy." Edward exhaled slowly. "And I was?" Linda tilted her head, studying him. "You were the real one, the complicated one, the one I ran from because I didn't know how to love someone like you." He let those words settle. For once, he didn't feel the need to argue. He knew he'd been difficult, distant, too focused on being the provider and not the partner. "I should have told you how hard things were for me back then," he admitted. "I was scared, afraid that if I let you too close, you'd see how fragile all this really was." "I already saw it," she said gently. "That's what scared me. I didn't know how to hold you up without losing myself." There it was. Truth, without anger. Just 2 people finally meeting in the middle of the mess they left behind. A nurse poked her head in to remind Linda about a patient. She stood up but lingered. "Would you want to grab coffee sometime?" she asked, surprising. Both of them. Not as a date, just 2 people trying to talk again. Edward nodded before he could think twice. "Yeah, I'd like that." She smiled, a small one, but real. And for the first time in a long time, Edward left the hospital without feeling like a ghost haunting something he lost. He drove home with the window cracked, the night air cool against his face, and for once, it didn't hurt to breathe. The coffee date happened 3 days later. Linda picked a little corner cafe far from the city noise, one of those quiet spots where nobody cared who you were or what baggage you brought with you. It was strange. Sitting across from her like that, no fights, no heavy silences, just her stirring sugar into her cup, and him pretending not to notice how she still did that thing with her pinky. They talked about surface stuff at first. Her work, his projects, the hospital, the new tech wing being added next spring. Then, slowly, things shifted. "I've been seeing a therapist," Linda said, her tone easy but honest, "since the breakup with Thompson. I didn't want to go back to the way I was before." Edward raised an eyebrow. "And how were you before?" "Too quick to run," she replied. "Too eager to believe something new meant something better." He nodded, sipping his black coffee. "And me. I was too eager to believe that providing meant I was enough. I thought the house, the lifestyle, the dinners, it'd speak for how much I loved you. I didn't realize you needed words." "Needed you," she said quietly. That stopped him. There were a million things he could have said back, but none of them felt right. So he just looked at her, and for the first time really heard her. They left the cafe with no grand promises, no labels, no future drawn in ink. Just a soft agreement to try again. Not romantically, not yet. Just emotionally, to talk, to listen, to figure out what was still left. A week later, Linda invited him to a charity gala the hospital was hosting. He almost said no. He hated those things. But when she mentioned it was a pediatric fundraiser, the same wing they'd talked about before, he felt something in him stir. He showed up in a tailored suit, sharp and clean, his usual armor. But when he saw Linda in that simple black dress, Smiling as she spoke to donors, he realized she didn't need rescuing. She never had. What she'd needed was someone who showed up with her, not for her. The event was classy, filled with people who shook hands too long and laughed too loud. Edward mingled, nodded, played the part. But his eyes kept finding Linda across the room, and when she finally walked up to him, he saw something different in her gaze. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wanted to see what you're building," he replied. "This place, it's becoming something more than just my revenge project." She grinned. "Well, it's never too late to rewrite the reason you started something." They danced once, just one song, slow, quiet. Neither said much during it, but Edward caught the way her head rested against his shoulder a little too naturally. When the music ended, she stepped back with a smile. "Do you ever wonder if we could have made it back then?" "All the time," he said honestly. "But we were two people trying to build a home without talking about the cracks in the walls. And now? Now we're at least acknowledging the cracks." As the night wrapped up, Edward watched Linda thank guests, hug nurses, joke with the hospital's COO. He realized something then. This woman wasn't waiting to be saved. She had her own life, her own battles, her own wins. And yet, she'd invited him in again. That night, as he walked her to her car, she stopped him. "Do you still want to name that pediatric wing?" He looked at her, brow raised. "Why?" "Because maybe this time," she said, "you'll do it for the right reasons." He smiled, slower this time. "What would you call it?" She didn't hesitate. "The healing place. No egos. No names. Just something that mattered." He nodded. "Then let's build that." The following weeks felt different, quieter, calmer. Edward was still Edward, sharp, driven, a man who didn't take half measures. But something had softened in him. He started showing up more, not just for business deals or public appearances, but for real things, like helping organize funding. For the new children's therapy rooms, meeting with architects to design softer spaces instead of just profitable ones. He stopped treating the hospital like a battlefield and started seeing it as something human, Linda noticed. Not just in the way he handled decisions, but in the way he carried himself now. He wasn't always trying to prove something. He listened. He asked questions. Sometimes he just sat quietly beside her in the staff lounge while she vented about a hard case or a stubborn board member. And when she got overwhelmed, he didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. One afternoon, they were reviewing blueprints together for the new pediatric garden space. Linda held a tablet, scrolling through sketches of sunshades, splash pads, and walking paths. Edward leaned over her shoulder, pointing at a corner. "That area should be shaded," he said. "Too much direct sun for sick kids." She looked up, slightly surprised. "What?" he asked, catching her expression. "You're thinking like a caregiver," she said softly. He laughed. "God help me." But something warm settled in his chest anyway. Later that evening, as they left the hospital together, the conversation shifted. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "What we had?" Edward looked at her carefully. "Every day. Even when I hated you, I missed you." Linda looked away, biting the inside of her cheek. "I didn't know how much I needed you until I left. By then I figured you'd moved on." "I tried," he admitted. "But nobody fit." She nodded slowly. "It's hard to fit someone into a space that still has someone else's shape." They reached her car and stood in the quiet. "You know," Edward said, "I didn't just fund the hospital for revenge." She raised an eyebrow. "I mean, yes, partly. At first. But somewhere along the way, it became something else. A second chance, maybe. Not just for us, for me, for the kind of man I want to be." Linda leaned against the car, arms crossed, watching him. "And what kind of man is that now?" He stepped closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the heat of him. Someone who doesn't run. Someone who shows up. Someone who names a healing center, not after himself, but after what she believed in. Linda smiled, small and real. "That's a start." They didn't kiss. Not that night. But there was something more intimate than that in the way they stood there, silent, breathing the same air, both of them knowing they weren't the same people they used to be. A few days later, Edward received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, neat, and signed by Linda. Inside, she wrote, "I used to think love had to be easy to be real, but maybe real love is the one you have to fight for even after it's broken. I think I'm ready to rebuild. If you are." Below it, she added, "P.S. The healing place is going to need a few benches and your favorite ugly water feature. I made space in the design. Don't disappoint me." He laughed, alone in his study, the letter clutched in his hand. He folded it carefully, slid it into his desk drawer, and called Marla. "Get the garden contractors back on the line," he said. "Tell them I want something weird, big too." She said I could. Marla didn't ask questions. She never did when it came to Linda. Edward leaned back, letting the moment wash over him. Maybe this wasn't a love story that had a clean beginning, or a perfect middle. But maybe, just maybe, the ending was finally starting to look right. The garden was finished by early spring. It bloomed faster than anyone expected. Soft purples and whites, cherry blossom trees lining the paths, and the sound of water flowing from a fountain shaped like a giant abstract swirl. Edward had insisted on it, said it reminded him of chaos, turning into something beautiful. Linda had rolled her eyes, but she let him have it. It was weird. It was loud. It was him. The official opening was simple. No ribbon cutting, no press releases, just nurses, patients, and a few quiet donors. Linda stood near the entrance in her white coat, talking to a little boy who'd just finished chemo. Edward watched her from a few feet away, hands in his pockets, heart strangely full. He had done a lot of things in his life, made his first million before 30, bought half the downtown skyline, had women throw themselves at him for what he could give. But watching Linda kneel next to that boy, brushing his hair back and smiling at him like the world didn't owe her anything, nothing came close to that. Later, as the sun started to dip, painting the sky gold and orange, they sat on one of the benches she had picked out. "It turned out better than I imagined," she said, glancing around. "You said it needed benches," Edward replied. "I made sure they were expensive ones." She chuckled, her laugh soft, the kind of sound he hadn't heard from her in too long. "I used to think you never listened," she said. "I used to think you didn't see how hard I was trying," he said. Silence fell between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Linda looked over at him, eyes serious. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. If I hadn't left, do you think we would have ended up like this anyway?" Edward took a moment before answering. "I think we would have kept pretending. You would have kept smiling when you were lonely. I would have kept buying things when I felt guilty, and we would have called that a life." She nodded slowly. "Leaving hurt, but it woke me up." "Me too," he admitted. "It made me realize I don't want to win all the time. I want to matter. I want to matter to someone who sees the worst in me and still shows up." Linda looked down, her fingers brushing against his. "I see the worst in you. I still remember the best." Edward turned toward her, his voice low. "So what now?" "I don't know," she said, looking up. "But I know this. If we do this again, it has to be different. No more keeping things in. No more walking away when it gets hard." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the letter she'd written him, the one he kept close. He unfolded it, smoothing out the creases, and handed it to her. "You still believe this?" he asked. Linda read the words again, slowly. She looked up. "More now than when I wrote it." Edward reached for her hand. This time he didn't let go. They sat like that until the garden lights flickered on, casting soft glows across the flowers and the water. He didn't kiss her that night. He didn't have to. Sometimes love doesn't scream its return. It just sits beside you on a bench, watching the world you built start to heal. The weeks that followed moved differently. Not rushed, not filled with dramatic moments or declarations, just slow, deliberate steps. Edward and Linda spent more time together, some days walking the hospital garden in the early evening, other days sharing quiet breakfasts in the back corner of a diner they used to love. No labels were thrown around. No, we're back together. Speeches. They didn't need them. They were two people trying again, but this time with eyes wide open. One night, Edward invited her to his house. Not the lake house, the new one. Smaller, simpler. He'd bought it when he realized that empty. Rooms and marble floors didn't fill the spaces people left behind. Linda looked around when she stepped inside. Her fingers traced the edge of a photo frame near the fireplace, an old picture of Edward and his father. She smiled. "You actually decorated this one," she teased. "No sterile walls, no echoing halls." He shrugged. "Guess I finally figured out a house doesn't need to impress anyone if it feels like home." They shared a quiet dinner, just the two of them, jazz playing low from his speakers. Halfway through dessert, she leaned back in her chair and looked at him across the table. "I forgot what it felt like to just sit with you," she said. "To not be planning something, fixing something, avoiding something." "Yeah," Edward said, his voice softer. "Feels new and old at the same time." He got up to clear the dishes, but she followed him into the kitchen, standing beside him at the sink. Their hands brushed again, and this time, it wasn't by accident. She held onto his wrist for a moment. "I think I'm falling in love with you again?" she said. Edward froze, then slowly turned to face her. His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked unsure, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. "I never really stopped," he said, "even when I hated what we became. You were still in there." Linda stepped forward. Her fingers reached for his collar. "Then let's not waste it this time." He kissed her. Not desperate, not possessive, just honest. Familiar. Like the moment had been waiting for them to catch up to it. That night, she stayed. Not because of passion, though there was that, but because it felt right again. It felt real. The kind of closeness that didn't demand anything but presence. In the morning, Edward woke up first. He watched her sleeping beside him, her hand resting lightly against his chest. And for once, he didn't feel like the man who'd lost. He felt like someone who'd been forgiven, by her, and maybe by himself. But not everything was perfect. Week later, Linda was called into an emergency surgery during a dinner they'd planned. Edward waited at the restaurant for nearly an hour before she texted. "I'm so sorry. Emergency. I'll explain later. I hate this." He stared at the message, and instead of the old bitterness, the "why am I not enough" spiral, he simply smiled and replied, "It's okay. I'll keep your seat warm, and your wine full." That night, when she showed up at his door, exhausted and still in scrubs, he didn't say anything, just pulled her inside and wrapped her in a hug she melted into. That was the difference now. Grace, space, understanding. They were still rebuilding, still figuring it out. But what mattered most? They weren't rebuilding the old version of them. They were making something entirely new. And maybe this time, it was strong enough to last. Summer came quietly, as if it didn't want to disturb what was already healing. The days were longer, warmer, and Edward found himself smiling more often without realizing it. He still handled deals, signed off on contracts, barked at lazy interns, but his edges had softened. He wasn't chasing something anymore. He was building it moment by moment with Linda. Their rhythm settled naturally. She'd spend some nights at his house, leave a toothbrush in his drawer, wear his t-shirts like it was the most normal thing in the world. He never had to ask if she was staying. He just left the door unlocked and the porch light on. One evening, they were back in the garden, the healing place, now fully blooming and alive with children and families. The benches were always occupied. The strange water fountain, the one Linda once called ugly as sin, had become oddly popular with kids. One even called it a magic swirl. Edward sat with Linda under a canopy of soft lights, watching a little girl chase bubbles across the stone path. Linda rested her head on his shoulder. "You ever think about what would have happened if we'd gotten married back then?" she asked. Edward smiled. "We probably would have divorced, miserably, then sued each other over custody of the espresso machine." She laughed. "Fair, but I still think about it." "So do I." She looked up at him. "And now?" He turned, to her brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "Now I think we're exactly where we're supposed to be." There was a pause. "Do you still want that?" she asked. "Marriage, a home, all of it." He didn't hesitate. "I want you, whatever shape that takes." Linda didn't cry. She just nodded, slowly, like she'd already known the answer but needed to hear it. A few days later, Edward called Marla into his office. She raised an eyebrow the second she walked in. "You're either planning something big or you're about to fake your death and move to Spain," she said. Edward grinned. "Neither, but I do need your help planning something quieter than a press conference, but more important than any contract I've signed." Marla narrowed her eyes. "You're going to propose, aren't you?" He raised his brows. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to. You're glowing like a man who bought a ring." He chuckled. "That obvious?" "Only to people who've seen you miserable." He met Linda on the rooftop of the hospital one night. The city stretched out around them like stars fallen to the ground. He didn't have a ring in his pocket. No speech prepared. Just a tired heart finally at peace. He turned to her, took her hands. "I don't need a wedding," he said. "I don't need a crowd or a honeymoon in Greece. I just need this. Us. You choosing me every day, and me showing up for you no matter what." Linda looked at him, eyes shining. "And what if I want the ring and Greece?" she teased. He laughed, pulling her close. "Then I'll give you both." They kissed under the night sky, the city humming below them. A year later, a small ceremony took place under the trees in the healing place. No media, just close friends, a few patients who had insisted on being there, and Marla, who cried more than Linda's mother. Thompson sent flowers. That was surprisingly gracious. The plaque near the fountain now read, "For every second chance that bloomed into something better," and at the bottom, in smaller letters, "Ian Ledward never expected the woman who left him for another man to find her way back, and Linda never expected the man she left to become the one who finally learned how to love without walls." But love doesn't follow blueprints. Sometimes it breaks you down just to build something stronger. And this time, it had a name carved into the stone. Not his. Not hers. Just a place. The healing place, where they found each other again.